that damn thing doesn't just sit there like a piece of paper on the shelf, right? You ignore that for 5 or 6 years, it's going to become attached to all sorts of horrible things, and if you ignore it long enough, you get the idea. It's going to turn into something that is completely unlike the little piece of paper that it's written on. And many problems in life are like that. You'll see that they pop their ugly little head up, and you know, and you might want to turn away, you might not want to think about it, which is the easiest way of turning away, right? You just don't attend to it. It's not like you repress it or anything like that. You just fail to attend to it. And that's as a long-term strategy, it's dismal. It's also something I think that's more characteristic of people who are high in neuroticism and high in agreeableness, because agreeable people don't like conflict. And people who are high in neuroticism, who are high in negative emotion, are hit harder per unit of uncertainty or threat. And so, you know, and that's partly why in psychotherapy, a lot of times the people you see need assertiveness training, so that would be the opposite of agreeableness, or they need to help get their anxiety and emotional pain under control. Those are not the only reasons. There's antisocial behavior, but you can't fix that in therapy in all likelihood. There's alcoholism. There's lots of other reasons, but those are two major reasons. So anyways, that was all to tell you that, oh yes, back to the rats. So okay, the rats are pulling on you can measure rat motivation by how hard they pull on the spring, let's say, and they're more motivated if they're running away and running towards, but let's go back to play. So you can take juvenile rats who haven't been able to play for a while, maybe they've been isolated, or maybe they just haven't been able to engage in physical activity, like many school children that you might be thinking about, neither allowed to play nor allowed to engage in physical activity, and there's a reason I'm telling you that. So anyways, you get one of these little rats and you can measure how hard he'll pull to go out and play, or how many buttons he'll push, you know. And that gives you an indication of his motivation. So anyways, you can see that a play-deprived juvenile rat will fight harder to play than a non-play-deprived juvenile rat. And so you can infer that the rat wants to go play. And you know, you do that. You do the same measurement with everyone around you. If they want to do something, you're going to poke and prod at them to see what sort of things they're willing to overcome in order to go and do that. You'll object, even if you don't really object. It's like, it's a measurement device. And if they're willing to overcome a bunch of your objections, then you think, oh, well, maybe they really want to. And that's another thing to really know. If there's something you want, you need about 5 arguments about why you want it. Because the probability that the person who's opposing you will have 5 arguments about why you shouldn't have it is very low. They just won't have thought it through enough. So the other thing that happens in the future authoring exercise is that you're asked to articulate the reasons for all the goals that come out of your vision of the future. So you're asked, like, why would it be good for you? Why would it be good for your family? Why would it be good for broader society? So that gives you 3 levels of argumentation right there. And if you have it articulated down into detail and it's related to other important goals, then you're a hell of a thing to argue with, because people just aren't that deep, by which I mean they just don't have that many levels of explanation or objection. And it's also really useful in relationship to your own mind, because if you want to do something that's difficult and that requires energy, a lot of different subsystems in your mind are going to throw up objections. It's like, well, maybe that isn't what you should be doing right now. Maybe you should be doing the dishes, or vacuuming, or watching TV, or looking at YouTube. Or if you're really sneaky, when you're trying to do something hard, what your brain does is give you something else hard to do that's not quite as hard, so that you can feel justified in not doing the thing you're supposed to, because you're doing something else useful. And if you give in to that temptation, which you often will, then it wins, and because it wins, it gets a little dopamine kick and it grows stronger. Anything you let win, the internal argument, grows. And anything you let be defeated shrinks, because it's punished. It doesn't get to have its way. So that's another thing really to remember, is don't practice what you do not want to become. And because they're neurological circuits, you build those things in there, man, they're not going anywhere. You can build another little machine to inhibit them. That's the best you can do. Once they're in there, you can't get them out. So, and then the ones you build to inhibit can be taken out by stress, and the old habits will come back up. So you got to be careful what you say and what you do, because you build yourself that way. So anyways, back to the rats. Okay, so the little rat gets to go out there and play. Now imagine one little rat is paired with another rat, but the other little rat is 10% bigger. 10% in juvenile rats is enough to attain permanent dominance. So the 10% bigger rat will win the first wrestling contest, okay? And so that's what happens. And then, so the little rat gets pinned, and maybe they play a bit, and then they're done with it, and so you separate them, then you let them play again. And the next time what happens is that the subordinate rat does the invitation to play. And that's like, you know, like a dog does when it wants to play. You can recognize that, kind of splays its feet apart, and it looks up and looks interested and sort of dances around. And you can do it with any kid that has a clue, you know, that hasn't been destroyed by adults. If your little 3-year-old kid or 4-year-olds are better for this, if you go like this, like they know exactly what's going to happen. You know, they're ready to dart back and forth, and they'll usually smile. And kids love rough and tumble play, which is now basically illegal in all daycares. It seriously is. Kids need it so desperately because it teaches them the limits of their body and your body, and it teaches them what's painful and what isn't, and it teaches them the dance of play. And without that, they're just little disembodied blobs. Like they have no finesse. That's what you're checking out when you dance with someone, you know. You're seeing if they have that fluency and facility for mutual reciprocal action embodied in them. And if they're kind of like this, you know, and just have no sense of rhythm and don't pay any attention to you and all of that, you have reason to question whether they actually inhabit their body and whether they can engage in a mutual interaction, a physical interaction that's going to be reciprocal and mutually satisfying. It's really important to check out. And a lot of that rough and tumble play, even interactions between a child and its mother. If you have a happy mother and a happy infant, and you videotape them and you speed up the videotape, you'll see that they're dancing. So one responds, then the other responds, then the other responds. It might just be with eye gaze and movement and all of that, but there's a dynamic interplay, which you don't see with depressed mothers and their infants. So, okay, so back to play. So the little rat who is the subordinate one, he has to do the invitation. And then the big rat can agree to play because he's in the dominant position. But if you pair them repeatedly, and this is really worth thinking about, because see, morality emerges out of repeated interactions. Because you might say, well, if you're only going to interact with someone once, you might as well just take advantage of them and run off. That's what a psychopath does, by the way. And there is room in the environmental niche for psychopaths, but they have to keep moving around, because otherwise people figure out who they are. So they just move around, and they can take advantage of one person, you know, maybe 5 times or 10 times or something. And then the reputation spreads and they got to get the hell out of there. So it's not a good long-term strategy, unless you can't think of a better one. So anyways, if you repeatedly pair these rats, unless the big rat lets the little rat win at least 30% of the time, the little rat will not ask the big rat to play. And it's a staggering discovery. It's a staggering discovery because you've got the emergence there of a implicit morality, essentially, that's even incarnated in rats, that emerges across multiple play sessions. It's like, yes, exactly. That's exactly what Piaget said about the emergence of morality. It's exactly the same idea at the rat level. So it's a massively, and the fact that there's a circuit, a separate neurophysiological circuit that's actually specialized for that sort of thing is also a big deal. Now, the other thing Panksepp figured out is that if you deprive juvenile rats of the opportunity to engage in rough and tumble play, their prefrontal cortexes don't develop properly, and they become impulsive and restless, and then you can fix them with methylphenidate or Ritalin. And those are the drugs that are used to fix hyperactive kids, most of whom are male. And that's because, well, really, you're going to take your 6-year-old, your 5-year-old, you're going to put them in a desk, you're going to get them to sit there for 6 hours. That's your plan, right? That's a stupid plan. And they're denied the opportunity to engage in play. And that means that their ability to become social is being impaired. It may cause neurological impairment, that's what the rat evidence suggests. And then you suppress that with amphetamines, because amphetamines actually don't activate the play circuit. They activate a different circuit which will suppress the play circuit. So it's it's not very wise. And I'm not going to go off on that tangent because I could tell you why the school systems were set up that way, which I probably will at some point, because it's quite an interesting story in and of itself. And it's the reason all you guys are sitting in desks right now. Somebody laughingly referred to this once as grade 15, which I thought was pretty funny given the, well, look at the bloody place, you know. Oh, hideous. And, okay, So now this is an interesting thing. So you got the emergence of morality in, say, chimps, you got the emergence of morality in wolves, you got the emergence of morality in rats, and the morality governs sequential interactions or group interactions. They have to repeat because it's an emergent property of social or repetitive interactions. That's why you can't just localize it in one instance. It's repeated. And there's been computer simulations of this to help you figure out how you might attain victory across games, across time. Maybe you need a strategy. And there's a very simple strategy, which I believe is called modified tit for tat. So if you're nice to me, I'm nice back. And if you do something bad to me, I do something bad back. But imagine you run that out in sequences of behavior and see who does best with what strategy across time, or an alternative strategy. Here's the best strategy. I trust you. You trust me. We start interacting. You screw up, I whack you, and then I forgive you and we start again. That's modified tit for tat. And there hasn't been it's a very simple algorithm. No one has come up with a better algorithm in the computerized simulation of game space than that particular strategy. So it's like, trust, but don't be a pushover. If someone violates the rules, you got to nail them. But then you don't hold a grudge. You open the door to further interactions. So pretty smart, pretty smart. And okay, so anyways, so what this means, because rats can't talk and wolves can't talk and chimpanzees can't talk, and what that means, just as Piaget suggested, was that the morality, the development of the morality precedes the development of the linguistic ability to describe the rules for the morality. He said exactly the same thing about kids, right? As they learn how to play games before they know what the rules are to the games. And so you see that if you're playing peekaboo with a kid, they can pick that up like it's really young. They get that right away. And you can play with kids almost immediately after they're born if you play simple enough games. And so they've got that deep, and they're unbelievably playful. So they've got that circuitry ready to go right off the bat, and it's one of the things that makes kids so much fun, because they just like to play all the time. And so if the play circuit in you hasn't died, which is a bad thing, then you can use that a lot with your kids, and it's one of the things that helps you love them, so that's a good thing. So okay, so the point is that the damn morality emerges before the representation of the morality. It's a big deal to know that, and that it emerges as a consequence of repeated social interaction. So it's not a top-down thing, it's a bottom-up thing. Now, Piaget says, well, it's not just bottom-up, because what happens with human beings is that they learn to play the games. One of his experiments was watch 7-year-olds, I think that's the right age, play marbles. And then you notice that they can play with each other and that they can follow the rules. But then if you take the individual 7-year-olds out of the game and you say, what are the rules? They give incoherent and incomplete explanations of the rules. So what that means is they don't really represent the rules, but they can act them out. And they have a partial representation of what they're acting out. Now, when they get older, the rule representation starts to fall into alignment with the actual rules of the game. And you can imagine that's why, because when they're playing something like marbles, they're going to have discussions like, you're cheating, or you're not allowed to do that. Because they're always going to be pushing the envelope a little bit, and then the group is going to render a judgment on whether or not that's appropriate, and out of that the rules are going to emerge. But they're not rules to begin with, they're patterns of behavior. It's not the same thing as a rule. A rule describes a pattern of behavior, but a pattern of behavior is a pattern of behavior. It's something that's acted out. So there's the individual within the group, and then the interactions of the individuals within the groups produces a hierarchical arrangement, or multiple hierarchical arrangements. Those are games, roughly speaking, or stories, nested inside an overarching story, which is the fundamental culture, right? And then that's nested in a whole bunch of competing cultures that have some commonalities, or they would just be at war all the time, which, you know, to some degree they are. So, okay, now, you see that, back to the movie, you see that happening in this movie. I mean, it's very, very quick, but the blue fairy turns the bug into the conscience, and then the bug tries to explain to Pinocchio what the rules of morality are. But the thing is, the bug doesn't know, because he's just a bug, and you know, he's just not omniscient. So the best he can do is to come up with like a propagandistic semantic verbal representation that's internally contradictory, and when he tells Pinocchio, Pinocchio has no idea what he's talking about, and neither does the bug.